Hello, we're live. I'm just learning StreamYard again. It's been a little while since before Christmas. So great to be back here. I'm super excited. I can't believe that my first guest, recurring guest, is Bret Packard. You're about one of the most, I'd say, in the top 3 or 5 on LinkedIn that I admire the most, that I learn the most from. So I'm super excited that you're willing to be a guest here today. So thank you for being here, Bret. For anyone who doesn't know me, I'm Christine Bell. I'm all about strategy, but we're not talking about this today, but do reach out if you want to find out more. I'm going to get straight into this because I'm super excited to have you here, Bret. So I'm going to get you to introduce yourself, and then I want to go straight into the topic that I'm most excited about, which is critical thinking. I believe it is probably the most important thing that all of us on this planet Earth right now need to learn is critical thinking. But before we get there, Bret, thank you for being here, and please introduce yourself.
Great. Fantastic, Christine. Well, Happy New Year to you. Thank you for I'm honored and it feels wonderful to be here talking to you, and also to those of you that are taking the time to tune in, that you could be doing something else, and we both realize that. So it's great to be here. And I'm Bret Packard. I'm the founder and CEO of Bret Packard Enterprises, which is a small portfolio of businesses that I built and am building in my post-corporate retirement arena area. I worked basically in corporate life, ironically, 30 countries across 30 years, 3 decades, and in the banking and wealth management sector, most of the time in Asia, but extensive time spent living and working in Europe, the Middle East, Africa as well. Spent 6 years in Japan, and then working across 12 countries in Asia Pacific, including your great country of Australia. So never lived there, but lived in Singapore 3 times, and I've given all the hotels there a workout as well as your airports. So anyway, but it's been great. I've really built a reputation over those 30 years of, not by design. I was telling somebody earlier today, but I built a reputation of handling and leading teams through crises. And it wasn't designed. It was kind of, I got thrown into it, and then didn't really know what to do at the beginning, but learned some methods. We'll talk about one of those today in critical thinking to help navigate significant crises like the 1997 Asian financial crisis, which originated in Thailand with the explosion of the Thai baht, and then it had some contagion risk, and that's when I entered Asia. I was in Japan in the aftermath of the 9/11 tragedy as well, when people didn't really know after that horrendous event, they didn't really know how to access their money or what to do with their money. And so I led the largest retail bank in Japan through that crisis. And then I was in London and then the Middle East when the global financial crisis hit in the late 2000s. And so I think fair amount of experience in dealing with that, and picked up some quite unique skills that are, we'll talk about this in a moment, but really built on how to keep teams highly engaged, how to transform cultures, ecosystems, the water that the fish swim in during times of crisis when the majority of managers don't really know what to do. So that's a little bit of a recap on what I've done with my professional life over 30, 40 years.
And wow, and if I had 2 hours, 3 hours, I probably wouldn't get through all the questions I have. So we'll try and keep it to the most important ones. But I know I looked at your CV, obviously, and your resume, and you've been a managing director for many years across, big financial institutions around the world. And part of that is culture. And before we get into the critical thinking, overall, you worked in so many different cultures. What's the biggest thing? Because I've also worked across many different cultures and lived in many countries. And it's been such a big growing lesson for me as well. So what's the biggest thing you learned around working with different cultures, especially through crisis?
To listen and to learn before pulling the trigger on anything at all, and to not just sit on the sidelines. If you're going to take some good shots and bad shots at any problem, because to be relevant, you've got to learn how to solve problems. So some shots are going to be good, some are going to be bad, but you've got to take a shot. And you've got to really ask, listen, and then take action in that sequential order. I've seen a lot of people, Christine, that what they do, they go in with basically blind, and they just start taking action because they're comfortable with something, and something that worked in North America would work in Taipei. Well, some things would work in Taipei, but other things would not. And just a simple example of this would be in Asia, for example, exchanging business cards is one of the most formal and signs of respect in business. Okay. And in North America, it's not. North America, you go in, you meet let's say you've got 4 people on your team, 4 people on the client that you're meeting, and you can slap the cards down on the table and stick them in your pocket and go on. You try doing that in Asia, and that'll be the end of the relationship before it even got started. That a business card is obviously a sign of respect, and reading the business card, and really not just being superficial about it, but really understanding what the person has done to earn what's on that card. And that's a cultural expectation. It's so that's just one of a million different examples in terms of it. Understanding it's very important to understand the environment that you're in, because culture informs behavior. And where most people get culture wrong is they think that, well, if I focus on the behaviors and get the human resources behaviors all lined up in a row, and I can expect people to, behave well and not get drunk at a Christmas party, and not, do foul things, toxic things at work, and that type of thing. It actually, they have it backwards. In that, but the ecosystem or the culture informs the behavior, and that's what so few people understand. And I specialize one of my businesses specializes in helping people operationalize and transform a culture, but it's based on the premise that the ultimate culture, will inform the behaviors.
I love this. And having done market research, qualitative research, focus groups around the world in many different Asian countries, even living in Singapore myself for a few months, and South America, North America, Australia, Europe, Russia, etc. I completely hear what you're saying. And one day you and I should write a book about all the fun experiences, because there's been a lot of fun experiences where I got it wrong. Yeah. But what I love as well, I'm just going to say hello. We've got a few people here. Royce, Malinis, I hope I pronounced this correctly. I can't see a few people. Christy as well. So thank you for being here. Appreciate it. Got to write a book about that one day anyway. So what's really important for me in terms of what I've learned, what you're saying, is actually also not just relevant to big companies. It's really relevant in the innovation process, and really relevant when you start a business too. Yeah, you got to be willing to fail forward, take action, try something, try things out, understand the cultural background, understand where people are coming from that you are speaking to or working with as well. So I just love what you're saying. Now, in terms of critical thinking, I want to get into this topic because it's so important.
Right.
How did you become aware that critical thinking, how did you learn that was a key component to performance and for motivating people?
Yeah, first of all, by being in the game. I didn't learn it in university. I certainly didn't learn it in the early days of my career when I was really trying to come up the curve with the specialization that I was in, which was mainly distribution and product design. But really being thrown into crisis. And, Christine, I've been in situations where just one. I was sent to Zambia. Was sitting in Dubai one day. My boss calls me I remember 2:00 in the afternoon. He was on the golf course, and I was in the office, and he called me and said, "I need you to take an overnight flight to Lusaka, to Zambia."
Yeah.
And that we're making a change at the top there, because what happened was that off the back of the global financial crisis, the price of copper had taken a nosedive, and Zambia, one of its key natural resources is copper. And they had made a bunch of consumer loans to copper miners. And of course, what happens when the commodity, when there's such a heavy concentration in one commodity, people lose their jobs, and they couldn't repay the loan. So they took I won't quote the exact amount, but roughly a 30 million pound sterling loss on the consumer loan portfolio. And that was enough to destroy the profit of what at the time was the largest bank in the country. So they needed somebody to go down, stabilize it, diversify the business, change the culture, restore some hope, and restore the prestige of being the largest bank, the top bank in the country. And so we were able to do that.
Eh? Huge.
What's that? Yeah, it was a big job, and in hindsight, one of my favorites there. But all of my jobs in hindsight were my favorites. Now I can look back, 30 years and find a good point and bad point on it. But the platform was burning. So back to your question, that was the situation. And so I didn't go in, thinking, okay, I got to be a critical thinker here. What I did is I went in with an approach that I had learned up to that point of ALA, ask, listen, and act. So find out what's going on. How do the people feel, right? Listen carefully to what they said, and then take action. But taking action would involve a negotiated response between myself and the 2,000 employees in the bank. And that involved also a labor union. So there was some engagement set up around ALA and finding this out. And in doing the solutions, I remember this, we had something like 80 or 90 suggestions. They wanted me to do 80 or 90 things right away, which wasn't possible, right? Especially in a business that large. And so I negotiated with them and said, look, let's identify the top 5. I'll do those. But in exchange for those, I'd like for you to do 5 things for me. And then we're going to work together and fulfill the 5 or 10 items that we agree to. So that's kind of the approach. And what that does, that sets up the stage and the playing field for taking action. Now, back to the topic of critical thinking. So it's important to understand, why is it important to think critically? And I'd like to just explain to you and those that are kindly tuning in why it's so important, right? And why so few people actually apply it. Because the forces in society, institutions, governments, education, the forces in society are attempting to steer the majority of the population into not thinking critically, into obeying and just do as you're instructed. And if you comply, we'll take care of you. The problem with that is that what if they're wrong with where they're steering you? And it's gotten so bad that it's turned into an indoctrination instead of an education. So critical thinking is the way out of it. Now, that's one way to look at critical thinking. The other way to look at it, and how I look at it with my clients, is that it's related to performance. And the performance formula is quite simple. It's difficult to get it done, but it's quite simple. And that is, you have to have the right attitude, whether that's an individual or a team. Okay.
Yeah.
You've got to have attitude. plus hard work or discipline, however you want to say it. So what you can control, right? Because things are going to go wrong, minus hypocrisy, minus scammers, minus fraudsters, minus liars. Okay. So the whole premise that what I do in business in terms of where critical thinking fits in, it is the detector of hypocrisy. Because I know that if somebody has a great attitude and they put in the hard work, if they're Tiger Woods, they can be the best golfer in the world. But what if you break your leg? But what if somebody hits you right below the knees, right, and you can't perform? That's what a hypocrite can do to performance. So if you're taking an action, you have the best attitude, you're putting in the hard work, you're an entrepreneur, let's say you're a small business, and you're not getting the results, you might find that somebody's draining all of your time because they're out there telling you one thing and doing, actually, they're telling you to do something they don't do. That's hypocrisy.
Yes.
So
yes, if you've got gurus out there, telling you
that's
you
right.
just can make 200,000, 1 million if you follow this and pay 20,000.
Yeah, it could be. Yeah, scam. I mentioned scam. So scammers, what? But it's not just scammers. It's people that they could be battery drainers, people that just waste your time, or people that really could care less about your success, but they're trying. They still got kind of a rope around you, and they're holding you back. Because your ideas are constantly squashed, but yet you have a great attitude. You're putting in the hard work, right? And because you're doing all of those things, you wonder why am I not able to take better care of my family? Well, that's because of this drain. It's like having an app open on your iPhone and it's draining all the battery power. So you can't take a video because there's no battery left. Something like that. So you better get rid of the app. You better learn how to deal with it. But in order to determine that, you have to have a detection system where you detect hypocrisy. Back to your question, that's the setup. Critical thinking is the way that you can detect hypocrisy, and that is our actions aligning with words. You hear a lot of people in society saying words mean everything. So whenever I hear that, I just shut the person off because words hurt. Your words are hurtful. So somebody that's overly obsessed with words, with labels, with pronouns, with whatever, they can do whatever they want. But to me, those are performance. Those are little yellow flags indicating that something is afoot that's going to interfere with performance. Because now if you can look at the words that somebody's saying and align it with their actions, then okay, I'll accept that, right? But to me, the actions, so are words important? They are. How you communicate is, because that's important with communication, but labels, words, pronouns, all of that stuff, to me, it's really the actions, because teams, performance, because ultimately that's what we all want to do, is perform, because that leads our way. So when you perform, it means you're relevant. And when you're relevant, when you perform, that means you have freedom to live the type of life that you want to live. So these things are important. If you don't feel those things are important, then what you should do is just get in with the wordies, and play the word game with everybody. And, 12 hours a day, you can talk about why it's important to say this word and that word and, these 5 things and all that. I've also learned, Christine, that if you do these 5 things, then you're going to have success. Or if you do avoid these 7 things, and you're going to, to prevent yourself from failing. I believe that generally speaking, there's nothing wrong with that. However, what if the conditions on which those 5 things were built, what if it's changed? And that's what I experienced through crises. I mentioned 3 at the beginning of this, and
Yeah.
a fourth, another one was COVID. Look at all the people that got washed away with COVID.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
It's because there are 5 things. These 5 things all of a sudden didn't work anymore because the world was locked down, or people were getting sick, or there was a big problem. And so that's why in the real world, over the long run, if you want to be successful, you'll learn to throw out the playbook, especially if it contains hypocrisy. And that's why operating off of words, promises, oh, well, he told me that, she said this, they want me to call you that, whatever, that is not going to get you through the crisis when the chips are on the table. And so that's why it's a long answer to your question, but I think the context is important because, Christine, so many people pretend to know about critical thinking, but they don't have any idea why it's so important.
And you know what I think as well, and thank you so much. That I really love that, and I had so many thoughts coming up, so I'll try and keep it short, but we might go a bit longer because this is too good, if you don't mind.
Okay.
And thank you for everyone who's here. There's a lot of people loving this, and saying what high-level insight spread, love this spread, greetings, etc. So fantastic. Now, there's so many thoughts that went through my mind, and one is, sometimes I totally agree with you. Look at people's behaviors. Don't listen to what they say. Look at their behaviors. They will tell you everything you need to know about them. And sometimes it's easy to spot those people, but often they are actually people we know really well who supposedly support us in our work environment or in our personal life. The ones who are kind of have narcissistic tendency. I hate to give anyone a diagnosis, but there are different levels on the spectrum, but there are certain tendencies and behaviors. So someone is like, I'm all there for you, but all they do is talk about themselves, or they actually put you down in the background, then don't trust their words. And what I also think it is, sometimes a lot of people like the easy way. It's kind of easy not to have to make a decision. It's easy not to have to think about what's going on in the world. It's easy not to think about why I have to do X, Y, Z in my work. But I think what you're saying is, if you really want to perform, and correct me if I'm wrong, it's about taking responsibility for yourself and your actions. And it's about paying attention to everything that's going on, right? But I also think with that comes motivation. If you do that, it might be harder because you're going to have to face things about people you may or may not want to. But it's going to motivate you to step up your game and to own your life and to be who you want to be if you're not afraid of it,
Right. Yeah. And I think that also what I'd like to say at this point is a lot of people, I think, spend too much time worried about empathy, and empathy is important. Okay. But whenever I hear somebody saying empathy is everything, and you've got to show empathy with all this, and again, it's important. You got to keep it in context. But if you can have all the empathy in the world, but if you don't have an EQ, if you don't have an AQ, an adversity quotient, and something goes wrong with your empathy for example, if you treat a scammer nicely because you're showing empathy to them because maybe they want to steal your money, for example, so you give them your time, you can keep showing them more and more and more empathy all you want, but you're not going to get a return on that time, and therefore your performance is going to go down. Work on your adversity quotient as well, okay, because that will complement your EQ and also your IQ, by the way. But the AQ is often forgotten. A lot of people don't even know what it is. And you do 3 things to strengthen your adversity quotient. And one is, if something goes wrong, it only works really when there's adversity. That's why it's called an adversity quotient. So if things are perfect in the world in a vacuum, you don't need it, right?
We don't need to think. We're just happy.
Exactly. That's right. But if something goes wrong, like a COVID, like a global financial crisis, something, the first thing is, don't blame yourself. Okay. Because that's not going to get you anywhere. Number 2, don't blame other people, even if they caused the problem. You're not going to get anywhere. You can figure out how to deal with those people, get them out of your life, get them out of your circle. But you've got to not blame, not carry this ton of bricks on your shoulder
Yeah.
Because if you show hostility, too much hostility over a long period of time, you're not going to, again, back to, you're not going to be able to perform.
No.
And number 3 is understand that whatever it is you're dealing with can be dealt with, and it's limited in scope and duration, because it is. And COVID, we got through COVID. It was a rough period, but it also didn't last 5 years, right? So it's important to work on those things even when the platform's not burning, right? And to make sure that you have the mindset, oh, geez, if tomorrow I come in and the lights don't come on, what the heck am I going to do? Well, I'm not going to spend all my time blaming the power company and yelling at people. That's not going to solve the problem. I'm going to find a way to get those lights to come back on, or maybe I don't need lights anymore. Maybe there's a different way of doing things. And that's where the critical thinking comes into play, because here's a tip on how to get your critical thinking going. Ask yourself why, whatever you're dealing with your time, is it relevant to your mission? And ask the question, okay, why is it relevant? And then how is it relevant? And a simple example of how to use this technique, Christine, would be in consuming media. So when I consume media, I assume that what I'm reading is untrue before I read it. Okay, I look at the headline, and I read 5 newspapers a day, by the way, from around the world.
On you.
Okay, the Sydney Morning Herald's one of them.
Bless you.
Right, and there's 4 others, right? But I assume the headline is a lie.
Yeah.
Okay, and I ask myself the question: so how's this relevant? Why is it relevant? What are they not reporting on? And then, if after reading what is there before me, if they've convinced me that, you know what, it seems that I was wrong, and it seems that this is truthful, because the person writing it or the publication writing it, they have a great track record, in a horrible track record in politics, they're probably wrong, but a great track record in weather forecasting, hey, I can rely on them because they really know what's going on here. So that takes critical thinking to actually say, well, why should I believe what Christine tells me when she's always wrong? Or why Bret's wrong about everything. So why should I really listen to what he talks about here? Or, you know what, that gal got it right. That gal got it right when it was raining. That person performed when the game was on the line. When the markets were frozen, this organization and this financial advisor, they were there for me. They called me, they held my hand, and they guided me through it. So that all takes critical thinking, because you have to ask yourself the question, how and why is this relevant to helping me go forward? Does that make sense?
Totally makes sense. And again, I hope you don't mind. We're going to go over time because this is so good. So
yeah,
I hope
fine.
you have time. Yeah. Thank you. Like, this takes me back. I started my career in advertising, yeah. And of course, big advertising, Ogilvy and Mather in Cape Town in Africa, where I also spent some time at the MBA and schooling down there. And it's so interesting because, advertising is about trying to convince you of something. It's about connecting with you through empathy and getting you on board, just like the newspapers, yeah. And is it always true? Absolutely not. Of course, there are some lines they have to be careful not to cross, although I'd say these days most people are happy crossing any lines, and which requires us to become more critical, yeah, but I think maybe that's a good thing. Maybe the COVID and all that, we can be upset about it, but maybe it was a real wake-up call. It certainly was for me, in terms of, hold on, I wasn't adaptable in my business, and I think adaptability is key, yeah. I hadn't really realized that things like this could happen, risk assessment, yeah. And suddenly I was like, oh, what happened here, yeah? Suddenly I couldn't get my, I had no clients, etc. I'm like, holy moly, I can blame the world, which I probably did for a little while. But then I went, no, this is a wake-up call for me. This is my opportunity to get clear on who I am, my character, my values, who I want to be, what I want to stand for, and what I believe in. So even with newspapers and stuff, you're absolutely right. Are they telling the truth? Perhaps not. But what is the agenda then? Many have agendas, yeah? Our bosses, co-workers, etc., clients, everyone has their own agenda. If we understand other people's agenda and our own, I think we can get a clearer, I'm not saying objective, but we can get a sense of what's right for us or not. Would you agree with that?
I would agree with that, and I think whether it's we talked about media consumption, but the same thing in business, right? Is that why should I believe that this person is an ally, and what have they done to show me that they're an ally? And then also at the same time, you can use critical thinking to determine, well, am I showing that I'm an ally? The other way around as well, because it is a two-way street, right? And then you become more conscious about, am I really adding value to this other person? In other words, am I relevant or am I irrelevant? One thing that I think the world learned off of the U.S. elections in November of last year, it had nothing to do with politics. It's cultural in nature, is that the media worked itself into irrelevancy and didn't really play a role in the election because they're so irrelevant. But people like Joe Rogan, people like completely independent, non-traditional media, because traditional media was caught just lying to people and making up things that were invalid and doing a headline, and then in the very last paragraph saying, well, we haven't really verified that this is accurate. And people they know that people don't read that. So people figured that out, actually. And so they just stopped consuming mainstream media. So
and now you have Zuckerberg, you just had Zuckerberg admitting that they were not correct.
Well, he got caught, is what happened. So Facebook got caught with censorship, right? But he only got, this would never have happened without Elon Musk and X, right? Because X was the one in the midst of the storm, the only one that basically said, we're going to allow free speech, right? We're not going to really censor you to death. Sure, they have rules and that type of thing, but nothing to the degree of having the government, tell them what to do. And Brazil is a great example. Brazil tried to tell X to take things off and they wouldn't do it, right?
Europe is doing stuff too.
I think that, so, these are, anyway, not to get too much into that, but the point is here you had for our lifetime and then some, a mainstream media that was trusted work its way into an untrustworthy source. And then, but over here, you had the inception of podcasting and inception of Joe Rogan type of people that everyday people that were smart, critical thinkers, not indoctrinated people, because those people are still watching television, right? But the people that are critical thinkers are actually looking for content producers that are critical thinkers and that aren't afraid to ask the difficult questions. And they're not afraid, if they're wrong, they'll admit they're wrong, and instead of trying to cover up the truth. So I think that the world, that's a recent current example that I think everybody knows about now. And the other is presidential polling, is that they now have zero credibility. But the way to look at elections are the betting markets, because the betting markets were accurate with this, right?
Well, they got money in the game, So
they have money in the game, but they also know, and when people are putting money on the line, they also know that polls are fictitious, right? And that they don't really mean anything because they don't reflect what everyday people are doing. So people they found another avenue. Smart, critical thinkers said, well, I wonder, somebody puts money on something, maybe I should kind of look at how that line is moving. And, you can do that in sports. You can now do that in politics, and that'll probably change in the future. But the point is, it proved to be very, very accurate, with it this way, because that's where people on the ground are going. So when I went to Zambia, back to the example I gave before, is that I established a relationship, having never been to the country before going in, with the people on the ground. with people at the customer contact level, and, really understanding what they were going through, their hardships, and the pressure they were feeling from customers on that our prices were too high and things like that. And all of that was really good for me to know, because I could then influence some changes. And a lot of it just involved reversing what had been done the prior 2-3 years. But I would have known that if I would have just come in and tried to continue the way things were always done before without critical thinking.
And I think what you're saying here is such an important lesson, whether you're in business, working in corporates, or just in general life. Yeah. Do your research, get to know people, find out the insights, learn from many different sources, not just one.
Ask questions.
Yeah. Start thinking for yourself, because anyone who says that you can't say this or that, they're just trying to shut you down. And guess what? It doesn't work, because we still have our thoughts in here. Yeah.
They're probably, you're exactly right, Christine. They're probably a hypocrite. I'm not saying that they are, but usually people that narcissists, people that don't listen, that don't ask questions, usually they're exhibiting hypocrisy. An example being, they think they're such a great leader or manager that they never need to unlearn a behavior and relearn a new behavior. So if you can learn to detect that, you can get away from that person, because you should no longer work for that manager. You should find a capable manager that understands that, I need to do this with my team, not against my team. I'm not going to say one thing and then do another. That's the important thing.
And I love what you're saying as well. You're touching on this thing as showing up consistently, as who you are. So your character is shown again and again.
Yeah, you don't even want to think about it. Right. That's right. Look, my career got results, right? And the track record speaks for itself.
Yeah.
But also I get results. I help my clients get results now too, but they're not short-term gains by cutting corners and by, screwing around people, right?
Anything good is usually long-term strategy and a lot of hard work and showing up consistently and building trust, because how are you going to get people in your position as the managing director? You got to get the team to trust you to take the actions that you want them to take. Yeah.
Exactly. That's right.
And they've got to be on board with those actions, because otherwise they're not motivated.
And the market, Christine, rewards that heavily, right? There's a huge premium on the market for the talent that is able to actually do this through other people. A lot of people can talk about it one-on-one and that type of thing, but actually mobilizing a team, designing a team, and then mobilizing that team, that takes a special talent. So folks, if you're listening to this, learn how to not only how to critically think, but how to apply that thinking, how to use that thinking to detect hypocrisy, so that your hard work and your attitude doesn't go down the garbage disposal, because that's where it will go if you don't apply this. And if you just let the educators, indoctrinate people without critical thinking and challenging that thinking, I think that's in the real. If you want real results in the real world, do that. If you don't want that, then just get indoctrinated. Right? It's better. It's better not to
live your life.
Listen to people like us. Right?
Exactly right. If you don't want to read the short, the actual detailed terms and conditions, and you just want to take people on the face value, whatever research they come up with, because any research outcome from research, any research can be skewed, any sample can be messed with, but you have to look at the small print, and you have to look at how they've done the studies to know what's gone on. Most people don't. They just believe what they see, what the headline is. A lot of this,
and it's not, Christine, it's not very popular to do this in society. In general, because it's going against the indoctrination. Do what I say, not what I do. It's
easier to lead and govern.
That's right. So you have to be prepared not to be
liked by everyone,
not to be popular in everything you do that way. And some people, they just kind of get off on that, and that's okay. If they want to do that, hey, that's fine. Nothing wrong with that. But if you're going to go around and label yourself something just because you think that that's what people are going to like, then, you've been indoctrinated. And the first time that there's a hardship, you're going to have a problem. Just ask big companies like Harley Davidson, Bud Light, Budweiser.
Having a few issues.
Just ask these companies what happened to them when they tried to do that. And
where did they go with the mob rather than
they abandoned their employees, they abandoned their customers. And so what did their customers do? They didn't protest, they just went somewhere else, right? And that's really ultimately what the market does. Just like we talked about with real people, they just, instead of griping about the media, they just stopped reading it and they just went over here and started to listen to podcasts, right? So that's what will happen. But some people will still feel good if they think, well, I'm going to do this because it's popular, and so it's an important decision to make, and it's sad to me to see a lot of people. I try to save some people from this. I don't spend too much of my time on it, but by trying to show them a different light, and only time will tell if they catch on.
They do or not. April is saying also pay attention to our own BS belief systems that are keeping us in a box. Absolutely. I just want to finish up this, if you don't mind, because I could speak to you all day.
Okay.
But obviously you have a life too, and the whole thing around leadership, what I loved about this thing is you actually, for me, it sounded like once we become a critical thinker as a leader and we have the character for it, and we bring people along because we talk to them, we listen to them, we understand their point of view. For me, it's very, actually, funny enough, I'm going to use some of those buzzwords out there, but it's actually very inclusive in a really positive way. It's also, for me, very empowering. And most importantly, you're giving people freedom to participate at all levels, which means that if you want to bring about change in a big company, if you can get the ground floor, the people to take part, to feel that they are part of the solution, that they're being heard, that they're being seen, and you as the leader empowering them to take part in it, I mean, we're at a whole nother ball game then, because that brings up motivations as well, doesn't it? Like in terms of people being motivated and feeling part of it.
It does, yeah. And you can be, that's right. And just want to talk briefly about what you just said. So the inclusion's great as long as it's not at the expense of excluding somebody else, right?
Exactly.
And having been a person that took 24 branch managers at the largest retail bank in Japan, we made a couple $100 million a year, US dollar equivalent a year. And it was a big business. And having transformed the composition of those branch managers from all, let's see, there were 2 females. So there were 23 males when I went in and 2 females. And then transforming that after a couple of years into 50-50 in a country where in Japan, you basically don't fire people unless they've broken the law, basically, generally speaking, it should be the right way. That's an extremely difficult thing to do, but we did that based on merit. We didn't do it based on the sex that somebody was, right? Or some quota. We did it based on merit, but what we did is we opened it up and we looked at everybody. And that's really how you do inclusion. This whole, a lot of the spirit of the DEI, for example, it has good intentions, but it's killing people in some parts of the world in critical areas. But if you take the spirit of what initially it was intended to do, it's dividing right now. But if you take the approach of making sure that you don't exclude people and you make decisions based on merit, then you have wonderful inclusion and everybody can make an impact. But if you're going to give a trophy to everybody just for showing up to work, the real world doesn't work that way. And it's not going to work. And, a lot of people don't want to hear this because they've been indoctrinated to believe that DEI is the only way to operate. But, the real world doesn't work that way. The people telling you that are hypocrites. Okay. So you have to learn to detect them. and understand that that DEI is very divisive the way that it's implemented.
It doesn't work.
Yeah, but you should be inclusive, but never at the expense of excluding merit. Okay, merit, because the people that manufacture Boeing manufactures airplanes, right? And when they shifted the scorecard of their executives, okay, more towards DEI, they prioritized DEI over safety. You started having doors and other problems with airplanes happening mid-flight, and you're going to get what you measure. So be very careful about what you're intending to do here, and make sure that you're actually um, making decisions based on merit.
I couldn't agree with you more. Now, obviously, you worked in Africa as well. In South Africa, they implemented affirmative action many years ago there, and whilst it's well intended, the problem with DEI affirmative action is that unless it's on merit, the person in charge that's been put in charge are beyond what they're actually capable of. It's not a great place for them to be. It's not a comfortable place to be. It's beyond what their capabilities are until they get proper training. And for the people under it, it only causes resentment. And like you said, it ends up being that unless you are in and say the right thing, then you're excluded. And great people who think greatly and have great merits, they're going to walk off. And guess what? No company is going to stay in business, like you said beforehand, which means everyone is going to get fired, or worse, like to your point, it's going to be unsafe, like, in certain industries, unless people have the capabilities.
Having said all of this, I will tell you that the one thing, one of the key performance drivers that led to my success in leading large teams was diversity of thought, right? And getting people around me with different backgrounds, skin color doesn't matter, sex doesn't matter, none of that mattered, but getting that diversity of thought, but being open. You've got to be open to, I'll give you another Japan example. In Japan, you don't promote somebody if there's two people going for the same job and one person is older than the other in chronological age. Traditional Japanese says you've got to give that person the job, because it's an insult culturally if you don't promote them based on their age. Okay, well, when I came in, one of the first appointments I made was actually the sales director. There were two candidates. I actually put in, not knowing that was the case, put in the younger person, but it wasn't because he was younger. Okay, it was because I had gone to lunches. I remember 2 lunches, 2 dinners with each of them, had long discussions about what I'm looking for, what they were going to do, asked a lot of questions, and made a decision based on this. Turned out to be one of the best decisions I made in my 6 years there. And then somebody told me after the fact, well, HR told me, well, Bret, you can't do that because this person's older, so you've got to give him the job. And I said, well, sorry, this is an American company, and this is something that we're not going to do in my organization. And so I overrode it and made the decision right, but it was based on merit. And I knew it was right because it was based on merit, right?
And it makes for a better team.
So I don't need, and I ran Zimbabwe during my time in South Africa during the Mugabe days.
Yeah.
And you mentioned South Africa. Well, Zimbabwe's equally complex, was and still is. Back in those days. And so, I understand the complexities with this, and don't need to be told by anybody, as you don't, that, diversity and local laws and everything is important. They are, right? But if you sacrifice merit, the people that say merit's not important, they're lying to you. They're hypocrites, and they probably are not performers themselves, which is why they'll probably never retire. And guess what? Last thing I'll say, they never smile. Have you ever noticed that they're always angry? That's because they never experience success, because they're always tearing down other people, and they don't understand that diversity is all about thought and merit, right? Because you can't make You can't make a horse drink. What's the saying? You can't make a horse
You can't.
drink.
You can take a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. I have a horse, so I know this for real.
That's
It's
right.
true.
So you make an appointment based on some of this other stuff, then that, and what if the person doesn't put forth any effort, which is what we see a lot of, right?
Yeah.
And so that's where that's anyway. I think we've
they're all saying I need to bring you back for another session, so we're gonna have to do a round 2 at some point when you're ready for
okay,
it.
great.
Now,
well, this
my
is our
battery's
second
running
one,
out.
right? In a couple of years,
Yeah,
so
yeah.
we'll do a third
We'll
one
do that.
anytime you want, Christine.
I love chatting to you, and my battery are running out. We're on an hour almost. I've got to let you go,
Okay.
and I'm going to university to teach, and I'm teaching innovation. And guess what? I have students from China, Iraq, Iran, America, Australia,
awesome.
anywhere in Asia. It's like the UN, yeah? But they're young, they're urban. It's all about teaching them critical thinking because they've got to create a new business together, yeah? With their cultural differences.
Well, give them some homework to watch this video and write you a report on it.
That would be great. I'll tell them about it today. So thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. Now,
You're welcome,
I put in
Christine.
the link here where to connect with you on LinkedIn so people can connect with you. Any other things you want to share where people can find you before we finish?
I think we're fine. That's good enough. Yeah.
All right. Thank you, everyone. We've still got several people here. So thank you so much for all hanging in there and listening. They're all loving you, by the way. All loving you, Bret. So fantastic. All wonderful.
Thank you, Christine. So and thank you all for taking the time to tune in, and best of luck to you in the real world.
I know, right? We all have to manage this real world, yeah? But let's do it with an open mind and a critical thinking.
Right. I hear you.
Thank you,
Christine. We'll see you.